Welcome to The Explainer. We're all about breaking down big topics by going straight to the source material. So, about a century ago, the United States decided to put that very idea to the test. It was a pretty radical social experiment. And the target? Alcohol. The thinking was, if we get rid of booze, we'll get a healthier, safer, more moral nation. But what actually happened? Well, that turned into a lesson for the ages.
All right, so let's start at the beginning. Why did this even happen? This wasn't some random idea that popped up overnight. Nope, it was the result of decades of activism, all aimed at what a lot of people saw as a genuine national crisis.
So picture this, it's the turn of the 20th century. Reformers are looking around and they're arguing that alcohol is the root cause of so many problems. And I mean big problems. They saw it fueling things like domestic violence, causing poverty because people couldn't hold down a job, and just leading to all kinds of public health crises.
And their solution? Whoa. It was something that had never been done before. They wanted a constitutional amendment to ban alcohol across the entire nation. Think about that. This wasn't just another law. They were literally writing this ban into the country's foundational document, a move that had never, ever been used to restrict personal freedoms on a scale like this.
And man, it moved fast. Fueled by these really powerful groups like the Anti-Saloon League, the amendment just flew through the process. Congress proposed it in late 1917, and get this, it was ratified in just over a year. So by January 1920, it was official. The United States went dry, kicking off a 13-year national ban on alcohol.
Okay, but here's a question. What exactly counted as an intoxicating liquor? The Constitution itself didn't specify, so Congress had to step in and pass something called the Volstead Act to define the terms, and the limit they set was tiny, just 1/2 of 1% alcohol. I mean, that number was so low, it made some naturally fermented fruit juices illegal. So yeah, your grandma's homemade cider could have actually gotten you into some serious trouble.
But the story here isn't just about public health, not by a long shot. The group of people who pushed Prohibition through was incredibly powerful. Yeah, but their reasons for doing it, well, let's just say not all of them were quite so noble.
Okay, so let's really get into this, because the movement was this strange mix of people. On one side, you had really sincere reformers, progressives, suffragists, who truly believed this was going to protect families. But then on the other side, you had folks who were using the whole thing to push their own bigoted agendas, specifically targeting immigrant groups and Black Americans.
And here, this is a perfect example. World War I was raging, and that fueled a lot of anti-German feelings. So what happened? That sentiment got weaponized against the beer-drinking culture of German Americans. Suddenly, their traditions were being painted as unpatriotic, even as a threat to the country. The sources also show us some just blatant racism. I mean, look at this quote. You have a famous temperance leader, Frances Willard, basically using fear to connect alcohol with Black communities. She's painting their gathering places, the saloons, as these centers of dangerous power that had to be shut down. So, you've got all these different motivations swirling around. But the big question is, did the ban even work? Did it fix all those social problems? Well, the answer turned out to be a huge, resounding no. In fact, instead of solving problems, Prohibition created a brand new one, and it was massive: organized crime. Think about it. The ban basically handed small-time street gangs the single greatest business opportunity in American history on a silver platter. I mean, when you make something an entire nation wants illegal, somebody is going to step up to supply it. And oh boy, did they ever.
This is when gangsters got really organized. We're talking about vast, sophisticated operations. They were basically running shadow corporations. They had their own supply chains, distribution networks, even marketing plans. And the whole thing was protected by a whole lot of bribery and violence.
And guys like Al Capone in Chicago, they built actual empires. We're talking billion-dollar enterprises. His operation alone was estimated to be pulling in $100 million a year. To put that in perspective, that's like making over $1.5 billion today. Just incredible.
All right, so let's compare the promises of Prohibition with the grim reality.
You had supporters like the famous evangelist Billy Sunday making these unbelievably optimistic promises. He was basically preaching about a coming utopia, a crime-free America where prisons would be turned into factories and all of society's problems would just disappear overnight.
But the reality? It was a complete disaster, a catastrophic failure. Instead of crime going down, The violence from the illegal liquor trade made the national homicide rate skyrocket. And not by a little, by a staggering 78% during those years.
And it wasn't just the crime. The alcohol itself got way more dangerous. See, once the legitimate producers were shut down, you had this army of amateurs brewing moonshine in back rooms and basements. With zero regulation, zero quality control, these distilleries were churning out stuff that was often contaminated with lead, industrial alcohol, all kinds of poisons. And the results were often deadly.
And this points to a really fascinating and kind of scary unintended consequence. It's sometimes called the iron law of prohibition. Here's how it works. When you ban something, the black market will always favor the most potent version. Why? Well, it's just way more profitable for a bootlegger to smuggle a small bottle of high-proof whiskey than a giant, heavy barrel of beer. So it happened. Americans ended up drinking much stronger and often more dangerous liquor. It's a pattern we've seen play out again and again.
So you've got widespread defiance of the law, you've got crime running rampant, and you've got a whole bunch of new problems nobody saw coming. Eventually, the public just had enough. They started to turn against this so-called noble experiment.
And that growing public disillusionment, it's captured perfectly right here in this cartoon. You see the Statue of Liberty's torch just sinking, drowning in this sea labeled prohibition. It's such a powerful symbol of how a lot of Americans were feeling, like their basic freedoms were being washed away by a policy that had completely failed.
And so a really powerful movement for repeal started to gain steam. Their argument was pretty simple. The cure had become way, way worse than the disease. They pointed out that the law was impossible to enforce, that it was fueling a massive crime wave, and that it was turning regular, everyday people into criminals. And then, and this was a huge one, the Great Depression hit. Suddenly, the government desperately needed the tax money that would come from legal alcohol sales.
When you look back on it, this whole era is just a perfect textbook example of the law of unintended consequences. Here, you have a policy that was passed with, for many people, the best of intentions. But in the end, it created so many more problems than it solved, everything from creating organized crime to making the product itself more dangerous.
Finally, in 1933, the 21st Amendment was ratified, and it did just one thing. It repealed the 18th. To this day, it is the only constitutional amendment ever to be repealed. It's this unique failure in American history, and it really stands as a cautionary tale, leaving us with a really powerful question about the limits of the law and what can happen when we try to engineer a perfect society.